It was in the late autumn of '97 that London was held in the thrall of a relentless fog, a greasy, ochre-coloured vapour that rolled in from the estuary to wreathe the city in a perpetual twilight. It was a tangible presence, this fog. It muffled the clamour of hoof and wheel to a dull, phantom-like clopping, and it dripped from the eaves with a dreary, monotonous persistence that seeped into the very marrow of one's bones. The lamps in Baker Street were lit by midday, yet their glow was but a feeble, spectral luminescence in the soupy air, serving only to illuminate the swirling motes of soot and damp that danced in their sickly halo. Within our sitting room at 201B, the atmosphere was scarcely less oppressive, for my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes had sunk into one of his black and profound moods of utter inaction. For 3 days he had alternated between languidly scraping discordant and mournful notes from the violin that rested upon his knee, interspersed with passages of such breathtaking beauty that they were almost painful to hear, and staring with a vacant intensity into the heart of our coal fire, as if he might divine in its flickering caverns the complex problem that his soul craved. The chemical corner stood untouched, a dusty testament to his last foray into the malodorous world of coal tar derivatives, the litter of his experiment undisturbed. His sharp, aquiline features, which could so often be lit with the fire of intellectual pursuit, were now listless and drawn, his grey eyes clouded with the weariness of a mind that had no problem upon which to whet its extraordinary faculties. "The criminal classes are growing deplorably dull, Watson," he had remarked that morning, laying aside the newspaper with a sigh of profound disgust. "There is no artistry, no finesse in their endeavours. Look at this. A clumsy smashing of a jeweller's window in the Strand, the thief apprehended 2 streets away with his pockets full and his hands bleeding. A sordid squabble over cards in a public house, leading to a predictable fatality with a beer bottle. The political sphere is no better, all bluster and no substance. It is the work of brutes, not of intellects. There is no problem in London for the discerning investigator, no delicate tracery of cause and effect to be unravelled." I had murmured some platitude about the quiet being a blessing for the constabulary, a remark which earned me a sharp, impatient glance. I knew well that for Holmes a period of inactivity was a torment far greater than any physical danger. His mind was as a high-powered engine, which, when not coupled to the work for which it was built, would shake itself to pieces in its idleness. I feared we were rapidly approaching the point at which he would turn to his 7% solution of cocaine, a vice which I had, with some success, managed to wean him from in recent years, but which always lurked as a shadowy alternative in these periods of intellectual famine. I could see the telltale restlessness in his long, nervous fingers, the far-off look in his eyes that I had come to dread. It was therefore with a sense of profound relief that, as the afternoon gloom deepened into an early night, we heard the sudden, urgent jangling of our doorbell. Holmes sat bolt upright in his chair, his lethargy falling from him like a discarded cloak. A flicker of interest, the first I had seen in days, shone in his eyes, and he cocked his head to listen to the footsteps on the stair. "A client, Watson, and at such an hour. The weather would deter any but the most desperate. It is a woman's step, light but hurried. She is agitated. This may yet hold some promise." A moment later, Mrs. Hudson showed in a visitor, her own face etched with concern for the state of the young woman she was admitting. Our guest was tall and elegantly attired in a travelling costume of dark serge, though her hat was slightly askew and her veil was unable to conceal the pallor of her face or the frantic distress in her eyes. She carried herself with an air of innate dignity, but it was clear that she was labouring under a severe strain, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "Mr. Holmes?" she asked, her voice low but clear, though it trembled slightly as her gaze swept the room. "I have been told that you are a man who can find answers where all others have failed." "I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my friend and colleague Dr. Watson," he replied, rising and indicating the armchair opposite his own with a gesture that was both courteous and commanding. "Pray be seated, madam. You have travelled here in some haste from a terminus on the southeastern line, Charing Cross, if I am not mistaken, and your need is most pressing. Let the fire warm you, and then you may tell us what has so disturbed your peace." Our visitor started, her gloved hand flying to her chest. "But, sir, how could you possibly know?" Holmes waved a hand with a gesture of airy dismissal. "My dear madam, it is my business to know things. The faint dusting of Kentish chalk upon the toe of your left boot is quite distinctive, a greyish-white powder easily distinguished from the yellow clay of Essex or the red loam of Surrey. A hansom cab from Charing Cross, the terminus for Kent, would deposit you here with just such a residue after a short walk in this damp weather. As for your urgency, it is written in your every gesture, in the way you clutch your reticule as though it were a lifeline, and in the slight tremor of your lower lip, which no veil can entirely conceal. Now, do not trouble yourself with these trifles. What is your name, and what is your problem?" The young woman drew a steadying breath, evidently reassured by his confident manner. "My name is Miss Eleanor Vance, and my problem, Mr. Holmes, is that the man I am to marry, Mr. Arthur Abernathy, has vanished from the face of the earth." The Tale of the Empty Vessel. Sherlock Holmes leaned forward, his elbows upon his knees, his chin resting upon his clasped hands. The listlessness was entirely gone, replaced by an alert, hawk-like intensity that I knew so well. It was the look of the hunter who has, after a long and fruitless wait, finally caught the scent of his quarry. "Vanished?" he repeated, his voice soft but incisive. "The word is a broad one. Pray, give me the particulars. Let us have no detail, however small it may seem to you, omitted. The trifles are invariably the most important." Miss Vance composed herself with a visible effort, unpinning her hat and setting it on the small table beside her. "Arthur," she began, "is an engineer, Mr. Holmes. A brilliant one. For the past 2 years he has been engaged in private work of a most sensitive nature for the Admiralty. He has developed a new form of, well, a device. I do not pretend to understand the mechanics of it, but it is a hydroacoustic resonator, designed to detect the presence of submerged vessels by the vibrations their engines produce in the water. He called it his mechanical ear. He once tried to explain it to me by saying that it could hear a whisper in a storm, distinguishing the hum of a propeller from miles away against the crash of the waves. You can imagine its importance to the Royal Navy in this new age of submarine warfare." Holmes nodded slowly. "Indeed. A device that would render the submarine in its current form quite obsolete as a weapon of stealth. It would shift the balance of naval power entirely. The interest in such an invention would not be confined to our own Admiralty. Continue, Miss Vance." "The prototype was completed last week. The Admiralty was to conduct its own formal trials in a month's time, but Arthur, being a perfectionist, insisted on a preliminary trial of his own. He wished to test it in the open sea, in the swells of the estuary rather than in the controlled environment of a test pool. He chartered a vessel for the purpose, a small, swift sailing craft known as a cutter. Her name was the Alicia. Chartered from where? From Gravesend. He hired her and her crew for a single day's voyage. The crew consisted of her master, a Captain Swain, a seaman named Morris, and a cabin boy whose name I do not know. Arthur was to sail yesterday morning. He travelled to Gravesend the night before, filled with an almost boyish excitement. He was to sail at dawn, conduct his tests in the outer estuary near the Nore sandbank, and return by evening. I was to meet him for dinner last night to celebrate. Her voice broke, and she paused to master her emotions, twisting a handkerchief in her gloved hands. "And he did not return?" Holmes prompted gently. "No. When he had not appeared by 10 o'clock, I became alarmed. I sent a telegram to his hotel in Gravesend, but received a reply that he had checked out as planned before dawn. This morning, my fears growing into a terrible certainty. I contacted the Coast Guard myself. It was they who told me the news." She shuddered, a tremor running through her entire frame. "The Alicia was found, Mr. Holmes. She was found this morning by a fishing trawler, drifting aimlessly with her sails flapping some 10 miles east of the Nore. She was entirely deserted." "Entirely?" Holmes's eyes narrowed to sharp slits of grey. "Almost. There was one soul aboard, the cabin boy. He was found huddled in the forecastle, incoherent with terror. He has been taken to the Seamen's Hospital in Chatham, but the doctors say he is suffering from a profound shock and can make no sense of his babbling. Of Captain Swain, of the seaman Morris, and of my Arthur, there is no trace, none at all." "What of the device, the resonator?" "It too is gone. Arthur had it secured in a heavy lead-lined crate to protect the delicate instruments. The crate has vanished." "And the ship's boat? The dinghy?" "It was still secured in its place, unused." Holmes remained silent for a full minute, his steepled fingers pressed against his lips, his eyes distant and thoughtful. "The police have been informed, of course?" "Yes. An Inspector Roberts from the Kent Constabulary is in charge. He was kind, but I could see he was at a loss. He spoke of a sudden squall, of the men and the heavy crate being washed overboard, but the weather reports show only light winds and some fog. He spoke of mutiny, of the crew stealing the device and making off with my fiancée. But why would they abandon a perfectly sound vessel and leave a witness, however traumatized, behind? And how could they leave without using the dinghy? It makes no sense, Mr. Holmes. None of it." "No," Holmes said, his voice a low hum. "It does not. It is, on the face of it, a most singular problem. An empty vessel, a missing inventor, a stolen prototype of immense strategic value, and a single witness driven half-mad by what he has seen. Tell me, Miss Vance, did Mr. Abernathy have any enemies? Any professional rivals who might wish him ill?" "Arthur is the kindest of men," she said earnestly. "But in his professional life, he was competing with a German firm, run by a man named von Bork, who were known to be working on a similar principle. Arthur had outpaced them, and he believed they were furious at being beaten. He even mentioned an incident some months ago, an attempt to bribe one of his draftsmen. He traced it back to an agent he was certain worked for von Bork. Arthur dismissed it as the usual games of industry, but it worried me. He was so trusting. One should never underestimate the lengths to which a rival, particularly a national rival, will go when matters of naval supremacy are at stake," Holmes remarked grimly. He stood up and began to pace the hearthrug. His tall, spare figure casting a long, dancing shadow in the firelight. The police will search for the bodies. They will assume an accident or a simple brutish crime. They will be wrong. The key to this affair lies not in what is missing, but in what was left behind. The cutter Alicia and the boy who saw what happened upon her deck. He stopped his pacing and turned to our client. "Miss Vance, you have done well to come to me. I cannot promise to restore your fiancé to you, for we do not know what fate has befallen him. But I can promise this. I shall unravel this thread wherever it may lead. Watson and I will leave for Gravesend on the first train. You should return to your home. Do not speak to the press. Do not speak to anyone. I shall be in communication with you the moment I have news of any substance." After he had shown the distraught Miss Vance to her cab, pressing her hand with a reassurance that was rare for him, Holmes returned to the room with a feverish energy that was a world away from the torpor of the morning. "Watson, your service revolver and a thick travelling coat. There is no time to be lost. The game, as they say, is afoot." The silent cutter. Our journey to Gravesend was a study in contrasts. While I attempted to digest the extraordinary and fantastic tale we had just heard, Holmes was a whirlwind of activity. He had dispatched a flurry of telegrams from the station, one to the Admiralty inquiring about von Bork, one to a contact at Lloyd's of London for the history of the cutter Alicia, and several more couched in a private cipher that was meaningless to me. Now on the train he sat hunched over a large nautical chart of the Thames estuary, which he had procured at the station, making minute calculations with a pencil and a pocket compass, and covering its surface with a web of lines and cryptic annotations. "The official theory is untenable, Watson," he remarked, without looking up from his intense scrutiny of the chart. 3 seasoned sailors and a civilian, along with a crate weighing several hundredweight, washed overboard in a calm sea. Absurd. Mutiny? For a device the crew could neither operate nor sell? And to what end would they murder their golden goose, Abernathy, who alone understood it? No, this was an act of human agency, but of an order of intelligence far beyond that of a pair of greedy seamen. A meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed operation. But how, Holmes? With the dinghy still on board, how did the perpetrators and their captives leave the vessel? Did another ship pull alongside? In the open estuary? Risky, and it would have been seen. It does not account for the boy's extreme terror. No, Watson, that is the question which lies at the heart of the matter. It is a problem of the first order. It suggests a method of egress so remarkable that it has left no trace, a method which, in its sheer audacity, has also terrified a boy into near insanity. Gravesend, when we arrived, was a grim, utilitarian port town, its waterfront a jumble of masts and funnels looming out of the grey mist. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke, brine and tar. A short interview with the stout and unimaginative Inspector Roberts of the Kent Constabulary confirmed Holmes's low opinion of the official investigation. The inspector, a man with a florid face and an air of profound self-importance, received us in his cramped office. "Ah, Mr. Holmes," he said, puffing out his chest. "Come down from London to show us county folk how it's done, eh? Well, I fear you've had a wasted journey. This is a simple matter. Them 2 sailors, Swain and Morris, were a rough pair by all accounts, known in every tavern from here to Chatham. They saw their chance, sir. Did in the poor inventor, took his box of tricks, and likely slipped over the side to a waiting boat from the continent. As for why they left the boy and the cutter, they panicked most likely, lost their nerve. Simple greed, that's all this is. Holmes listened with an expression of polite patience, asking a few desultory questions about the tides and currents before taking his leave. "He is looking for a simple rope, Watson, when he should be seeking a spider's thread," Holmes muttered as we made our way to the pier where the Alicia was now moored under police guard. His theory does not explain the unused dinghy, the lack of any sign of a struggle, or the profound mental state of the only witness. "Come, let us see what the vessel herself has to tell us." The Alicia was a fine-looking craft, about 40 feet in length, with the clean, swift lines of a racer. She was trim and well-maintained, her brasswork gleaming dully in the weak light. A police constable stood guard at the gangplank, but a word from Holmes and the sight of his official-looking card was enough to grant us access. As my foot touched the deck, I felt a distinct chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. The vessel seemed unnaturally silent, a stage upon which some dreadful unseen drama had been played out. The sails were furled, the ropes coiled neatly. To a casual eye, she looked as if she had just returned from a peaceful day's sailing. But it was not a casual eye that now surveyed her. Holmes seemed to transform. He was no longer the languid aesthete of our Baker Street rooms, but a creature of pure, focused intellect. He produced his powerful magnifying lens and dropped to his hands and knees, beginning a slow, methodical crawl across the deck, his nose inches from the planking, like a hound upon a fresh scent. I watched, fascinated, as he examined every inch of the woodwork, every scuff mark, every coil of rope. He sniffed the air, tasted a residue on the gunwale, and ran his sensitive fingers over surfaces that seemed to me entirely unremarkable. He spent a considerable time near the port gunwale, just aft of the mast. "Watson, your eye is as good as mine. What do you make of this?" I knelt beside him. He was pointing to a series of faint, curious white marks on the holystone deck. They were not scuffs or stains. They appeared to have been drawn, perhaps with chalk, and formed a peculiar geometric shape, a perfect circle, some 3 feet in diameter, with an elaborate star-like pattern inscribed within it. The lines were unerringly precise. "Good heavens, Holmes!" I exclaimed. "What is that? Some sort of superstitious sign? A sailor's charm against evil?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps something else entirely." His voice was tight with concentration. He scraped a minute sample of the white dust into a prepared envelope. "Note the precision of it, Watson. This was not drawn freehand by some idle seaman. This was laid down with a ruler and compass, or I am much mistaken. It is the work of an engineer." He then leaned closer, his nose almost touching the deck. "And there is a faint smell here, ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. Do you detect it?" I bent down and caught the faint, sharp, metallic scent. It was most peculiar. He moved on, his examination becoming, if possible, even more minute. He sniffed at the very air in the small cabin. He ran his fingers along the boom, and he untied and retied a knot on a cleat with a frown of intense thought. Finally, he came to a rope that had been cleanly severed. It was a thick mooring line that had been spooled on the deck. He examined the cut end with his lens for a long time. "Observe, Watson," he said, holding it out to me. "This was not cut with a sailor's clasp knife, nor with an axe. The fibres are not frayed. They are sheared. The blade was exceptionally keen, but it was also slightly serrated, and it was applied with immense, steady pressure, almost as if by a machine. My mind reeled, trying to assemble these disparate and bizarre clues. A geometric drawing, the smell of ozone, a strangely severed rope, a terrified boy, and 3 vanished men. Holmes completed his tour of the deck and stood at last by the tiller, gazing out into the grey void of the estuary. His face was hard and set, and his eyes had a faraway look, as if he were seeing not the foggy waters before us, but the entire chain of events as they had unfolded. "Well, Holmes?" I asked at last. "What does it all tell you?" He turned to me, and there was a gleam in his eye that I had not seen since the conclusion of the singular affair of the Priory School. It was the thrill of the intellectual chase. "It tells me, my dear Watson, that we are dealing with an intellect of the very first order. This is no common criminal. The mind behind this is as daring and brilliant as any I have encountered, perhaps even possessing a genius that borders on the fantastic. He has solved the problem of boarding and leaving a vessel in mid-ocean without a trace, and he has done so in a manner so extraordinary that it has shattered the reason of the only witness." He pointed a long, thin finger towards the strange chalk marks on the deck. "The police see a floating coffin," he said, his voice low and resonant with excitement. "I see a carefully prepared landing pad. The problem, Watson, is not that there are no clues. It is that the clues speak of an impossibility. And it is my business to make the impossible merely improbable, and the improbable, upon closer examination, the self-evident truth.